you actually are kind of bound by your home in some ways because you need to be there to care for children. So that kind of idea that your whole sense of self shifts a bit when you become a mother. And I think that was something that no one could possibly explain to me until I became a mother, because I thought, well, I know how to balance everything. I'm sure it'll be fine. But there's something so unique about you actually brought a life into this world, and you have some major responsibilities as a result.
Welcome to Silver Lining Moments, where we celebrate the people who remind us of the light in ourselves, the light in each other, and the light in our world. They are silver linings to our world. Hi, I'm Carrie Raleigh, the host of Silver Lining Moments, and our guest this episode is Bonnie Silvestri. Bonnie and I share a vision of using creativity for good. Bonnie had taught many women-in-law classes that discussed cases involving pregnancy in the workplace, raising families in the workplace. When she became pregnant, these were no longer cases that she read and discussed with her students. They now involved issues that she was seeing in her personal life. And that balance between work, family, that always seemed like she could manage it, now all of a sudden did not look so easy. And this started her on a quest or a curiosity to how do countries and societies view pregnancy and raising families. And from this curiosity, she wanted to explore how paid family leave policies in different countries affect women in the workplace as well as families, fathers, mothers, children, and everyone in the community. So she started an experiment with her family. They moved to England for 6 months and they created a documentary, Funnel of Dreams, in which explores and compares England's family leave policies with that of the US. In our conversation, we discuss her documentary, why she called it Funnel of Dreams, and what were some of the findings, some of her thoughts, impressions of this documentary. This documentary is now featured in several film festivals, and you can check it out online. Listen to our conversation and discover how a moment of motherhood is lined by dreams. Bonnie, hi, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Carrie.
Thank you for being here. So tell us a little bit about your project, Funnel of Dreams, and you can start wherever you want. Do you want to start with your idea for this, and then we can work our way forward?
Absolutely. So I was teaching women in the law at University of South Florida, Sarasota, Manatee. And it's really cool that Carrie and I both went to the same law school. And I started teaching law classes, which was really fantastic. And I got to kind of teach law the way I wish I would have learned it, and focusing a lot on stories. And the story behind the cases has been the way that I like to teach it. And I began to learn so much about the people behind the cases that we were studying, particularly when I was teaching women in the law while pregnant. And I started to think about the ways in which those cases have impacted women throughout, basically from the 60s on, and the opportunities to be in the workplace. But yet, once you become pregnant, there's a lot more that happens, that potential discrimination. How do you leave and then come back? When should women be asked to leave? Are there ways in which, by the virtue of being pregnant, you are sort of teaching children about how babies are made? And that was actually one of the cases where the school system didn't want pregnant women teaching children after a certain stage of pregnancy. So all of these things, I started thinking,
Wait, wait,
oh
wait,
my
wait, wait, wait.
goodness,
Back up. When was this? Do
that
you remember
was
that? I
it
don't
was
remember.
actually, I believe that was one of the cases in Columbus, Ohio, and it was in the 80s. So they were asking women to leave at about 5 months.
when they
so
were
that
starting
they
to show when
when
they
they
were
were
starting to
starting
show
to
in their pregnancy.
show. And I remember there was one, I think it was a footnote where they talked about how you would look like you had swallowed a watermelon, and children might ask, why are you getting bigger and all of this? And they were just feeling that this was something that they didn't want children to learn about yet. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, this is their teacher and the person that's been entrusted with their education all year. So why ask them to leave early when they're absolutely capable of continuing? So this was, I thought, very interesting. Like, here I am kind of in the going through those stages as we were covering these cases and thinking about it from a personal perspective.
Yeah.
I'm sure my students were noticing, I'm really progressing along in my pregnancy. And I remember there's this one point where I like to sit on those sort of high chairs that raise you up a little bit so I could see everybody in the classroom. And I dropped my pen and I realized, wow, like everyone's going to be noticing the fact that I am somewhat a little bit less capable of moving around freely as I'm used to.
Yes.
And it was really just this moment where I was like, wow, my life has really changed. And and I am sort of present for that right now in a way that I wasn't necessarily when I taught the class in previous semesters. So I started thinking about all of that. And then I also heard from a lot of different people that they were experiencing discrimination as they were preparing to leave for maternity leave. And so it really did seem quite comparable to that case that we were studying in class, thinking about being asked to leave earlier than you necessarily need to.
Can
A
you give
lot of
some,
women,
can I just, I'm sorry to interject here, but
okay.
can you just give some examples of when they said they felt or they were experiencing discrimination when they were getting asked to leave? What are some examples of how that happened or how discrimination could take place?
Well, I even felt it a bit myself, like, oh, what are you going to do? How are you planning to leave and come back? What are some of your plans? Things that I felt I wanted to keep in a personal way and
Mm.
didn't necessarily want to share. Then I was talking to someone I remember at my hair salon, and she was saying, it's the strangest thing, but I'm just noticing that that my division is being either eliminated, I think, or reduced. And so she said, I don't know if I'm going to really even have my job when I get back, because we were both in about our 8th month talking. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. And then at that point, I also had the opportunity to meet with Anne Marie Slaughter. That was after I had Daphne. But just sort of hearing about and thinking about the ways in which maternity leave is treated here as opposed to in other countries. So that's what started me thinking about not only are all of us here in the US going through this experience, but there's people all throughout the world who are having similar experiences, and how is this impacting them, and how does it maybe change the life of the child as well
Yeah.
after a child is born. So there's the impact on the mother, but then there's the impact on the child. And so I thought that those dual interests were really important.
Yeah, I think so too. And you said so much there that I just want to I don't know. I don't know how it's going to come out. We'll just say all the thoughts that I have and we'll sort through them based on what you were saying. The first one comes to mind is, yeah, it's the impact on the mom, the impact on the child. And we'll get into this with the documentary. And I think one of the people you interviewed there was talking about also the impact on the fathers, the men, and also an impact on society in a whole, because we're all part of this society together. And um, but before we get to that, I love or I'm interested in the interplay of we have these laws in place, and these laws are in place to serve a policy of we don't want to discriminate against women, we don't want to discriminate against pregnant women because we have those laws in place. But yet, in the culture of the business, in the, I don't want to say like maybe not even in the direct, sometimes it's in the direct action of the employer, but sometimes it might be in the comments or behavioral changes or attitudes of the coworkers that from what you were saying makes it sounds like you were describing, like once you're pregnant and you start showing, it's almost like people start treating you a little differently, and you have to maneuver through that as you're still trying to do a good job and focus on this new things in your life. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think we kind of have a similar generational upbringing, which was
Yeah.
that we are absolutely equal in every single way. And so I think about how much I admired Marlo Thomas putting together Free to Be You and Me, which you may remember also from childhood. And just the idea that we could do absolutely anything that we wanted to do in our careers. And that was really sort of motivational for us growing up in the 70s.
Yeah.
And then, so I actually had my daughter late in life. So I never felt that there was anything that I wasn't going to be capable of doing by virtue of my gender. However, once you become pregnant, that is really a pretty big distinction between men and women. So, it's this moment where you feel that people are going to potentially treat you differently because you are pregnant, and then you're going to be leaving for a period of time. And then there's those realities of the fact that both mothers and fathers have to leave sometimes to pick up their children, or there could be sick children. So there's all kinds of ways in which you maybe are not deemed to be the ideal worker because you may have something else that is drawing you away from the workplace. So for me, being so interested in work-life balance generally, and I've always been really interested in that and maintaining my health and wellness throughout my career, but is that sort of push and pull of home life more generally that I think workplaces, when you asked when we talked earlier about what would be my dream, it would be for workplaces to see you as a whole person and to realize that you might have something that you have to go see at your child's school. And people sort of say that's fine and everything like that, but I don't know how much they necessarily like the fact that you might have to leave at like 11 a.m. to go check out an award ceremony or something like that. And actually, the schools aren't really built for working people very much either. You're asked to attend all kinds of things that are right in the middle of the workday. And that's a real big push and pull for stay-at-home parents it's more, they have more opportunity to go and volunteer in the classrooms and things like that, as opposed to when you're working, it is a lot harder. So there are ways in which schools could even be more accommodating, and also workplaces. So that's getting a little further down the pipe, but
Yeah.
those are some of the things that I hadn't really spent really any time thinking about before I had my daughter, that I'm really experiencing, almost on a daily basis, that push and pull of the things that you want to do to be fully engaged parent and the things that you want to do as a fully engaged employee as well.
Yeah. So let's back up for a second. At the time that you were pregnant, or before you were pregnant, what were you doing? What was your work at that time?
So I was teaching classes, as I mentioned, and
Okay.
also working for the Institute for Public Policy and Leadership at USF Sarasota Manatee.
So you were a working mom to be, as you are exploring women issues in the law, policies, and society about families and work-life balance. And so you had this idea. So let's talk about the idea.
Yes, so I had the opportunity to interview Anne Marie Slaughter, and she was sort of the inciting incident, which was that she talked about how mothers around the world are treated differently. And she famously wrote, Why Women Still Can't Have It All. So I was very intrigued with what she was talking about. And I thought that we have a tendency here in the United States to say, well, they've got it all right over there in this other country. And we are not doing things correctly, or there's that sort of tendency to think the grass is always greener,
Yeah.
and look at how they're doing it in other countries, without sort of sinking deeply into that experience to know what it might be like. And I have to admit, I thought the same thing. I thought, well, that would be so much better if we had a year off for maternity leave, paid maternity leave, like they do in other countries. So we decided to go on this adventure and spend time overseas, and we were trying to decide where to go. And we ended up finding a house sitting assignment in Wales, which is a place that I hadn't considered going to originally. But it was such a great experience because we shared the same language. So it was easier to interview people when I was there. But also, they have a very generous leave policy. So it was very interesting to kind of explore how the parents felt about having that time off and having it be paid. And there were a number of sort of ripple effects that I felt were the case that would be different from how we would necessarily view pregnancy and what happens after pregnancy. So I think that we have built in stressors that, because we know to some extent that it is very hard to afford a child. And so there is that sort of thought that, like generally speaking, it might be easier to have two parent incomes and all of that. Whereas because they knew that they were going to have at least some kind of benefit, I think there wasn't as much stress on what happens after you have a child. So that could have all kinds of different ripple effects. One thing I noticed was people were more likely to say that they were having a child with a partner and weren't necessarily married to that person. So I noticed that there was some more flexibility even in familial relationships, familial connections. And also, I don't know how that would impact things like, I mean, to be honest, like abortion rates, maybe knowing that you had paid time off would possibly have an impact for someone who feels they have no choice and no way of supporting a child. Yeah. So, those kinds of things could be impacted. So I always find that with the public policy, there's all kinds of other concomitant effects from that policy. So yeah. I think that's very interesting as well.
And sometimes that ripple effect, what you were just saying, could help bridge conflict. What I'm saying, because sometimes the ripple effect is unintended, it makes things worse, but sometimes that ripple effect could bring people together. For instance, I'm just thinking on the abortion issue, if those who are against I don't like you. I hate the framing of the words of framing of how this issue is framed. So I use my own words because I just think because someone is against the government having laws prohibiting abortion does not mean that that person is for abortion. It means that they're against the government putting laws in place, and they may still want to prevent unwanted pregnancies, right? That's the thing. And the people who are for having government regulations prohibiting abortions, you would think those people would also share value of preventing unwanted pregnancies or minimizing the number of abortions that take place. So wouldn't those two groups both agree on a policy that would minimize that could have the potential of minimizing the number of abortions? That seems like that could be in that policy being, hey, by giving people options, giving them support, then that could lead into a discussion of decreasing number of abortions.
And I don't actually have any data to show that.
Yeah.
It was just something I was thinking about.
It would be something I think it would be something worthwhile to look into. And when people are looking at creating new policies, it's important, I think, to look at the ripple effect from previous policies to see where we are and where we can go forward. So let's first, when you say we, at that time, you had already had your baby. So who's the we in all of this?
So my husband, Mike, and I, and my daughter, Daphne, who was 2 when we left the country to go on this journey. And at that time, I was continuing to teach, but I had flexibility in my schedule because I was teaching online. And so we were able to go overseas and take this opportunity to live in a new environment and meet new people and see what things were really like for a whole other culture, which I think ended up being a very exciting and important formative experience in ways that I couldn't have necessarily predicted when we decided to go, because I was very focused on how would maternity benefits impact someone, but also just the opportunity for my daughter to explore another culture at a young age. And she remembers a lot of that time that we spent together. And the other thing was, it kind of illustrated my point, which was how important it is to have that time together as a family in formative years, because we had sort of this really close bonding time for that time that we were there.
Yeah, I can see how that is because that really puts you are the focus of each other at when you're living in a different country. It does give that sense of we are one type thing. Um, so how did you well, just on a side thing, how did you get the house sit? Where did you find the house sitting experience from?
It was on a website, but I don't remember which one. At the
Okay.
time, I was writing for This Week in Sarasota, and our editor ended up getting a job with Airbnb, and he was like big on this idea of, I think he found a house sit for me that was like 2 weeks in Italy. And I was like, he sent it out to our group, and I was
Yeah.
like, that is such a cool idea. So then we started brainstorming about that as a way to be able to go to another place.
Yeah, it's very nice. My husband and I have
Yeah.
done house sitting and pet sitting together, so it is a nice way to experience, I think, a culture or a different country at a little deeper level because sometimes it gives you an opportunity to stay there longer and you're more in a local setting. So you and in the documentary, you show the house sit that you were at. It looks absolutely beautiful and an amazing place. Can you tell us a little bit about the house that you were at? Because that's you go into this house and that's kind of your foundation as you're starting to go around and also work on this project.
Yes, that's such a great point. I like how you called it a
Mhm.
foundation. So it was in a small town called Knighton, and it's on the border between Wales and England. So even on rides, you'd be kind of moving between England and Wales and England and Wales on the little country roads. And it was really a beautiful place to live. They had even like a little wooden hobby horse for Daphne. And it was just a really cool experience. It was a very, very small town. So I have not really ever lived in a town as small as that. So it was really kind of cool to walk around and you kind of saw the same people. It reminds me of a lot of those shows that I really romanticize from, sort of masterpiece theater. And, there's the one grocery store and the one fish and chips place and the one Indian restaurant. And that was kind of it. There were just a few little cute restaurants to go to. And when we wanted to explore, we had to drive to other places. I remember that's how I met Vix, who was interviewed in the film. I was thinking that I saw something about an art gallery because I was reading this magazine that I got. And I said, "Oh, where's the nearest art gallery?" And she was like, "What?" So I thought that I would just pop out and there'd be these galleries and things like that.
Yeah.
And it was like in a town like 45 minutes away or something. And I just didn't really even have that concept. There was like one little thing that had been sort of, I don't even think it was something that you could actually go in and tour. It was just like an exterior that had some historical significance. So I think that's what I ended up trying to find also. So I love going to museums. So when we wanted to explore things like that, we ventured much further out. So, but it was a great way to meet new people, to
Yeah.
kind of go and wander around the small town and get to meet people. And the librarian who had been helping us when we went there first because of the Wi-Fi and everything. And he was just so charming and just the perfect sort of small town British librarian. And it turned out that that was her father, but I didn't even realize that. I'd been talking to her for months and then talking to Phil for months. And then at one point she mentioned that that was her dad. So it was
Oh,
just so
how
adorable.
funny. That is
And
so
he got
nice.
really excited about the project and was the first person to sort of discuss the fact that David Lloyd George, who was a Welsh born prime minister, had been the first to suggest the idea of maternity benefits. So he got so excited when I told him I was interested in maternity benefits. And we ended up at a later point meeting someone who had worked at the David Lloyd George Museum. So she had that museum opened up for us so we could take a tour of the museum and learn about how he came up with the idea of having maternity benefits and kind of getting to explore the life of this particular
Yeah.
Welsh prime minister. And then also, I felt like because Vix grew up with a father who was a librarian and was very focused on these kinds of values, she sort of had that framework in her way of thinking about maternity benefits and just sort of generally speaking, how you can have government supports for people. So that was something she grew up with in her household. So you
Yeah.
could kind of see how it influenced the way she speaks about it in the film as well.
So let's pause for a second and compare the difference in maternity benefits in general. Like what maternity benefits are available in the US?
So in 1990, the Family Medical Leave Act was passed, signed by President Clinton, and it provides unpaid leave for any kind of family need. So even if you were caring for a sick parent, even if you're caring for yourself,
Yeah.
potentially if you're sick, and your job is maintained for you for 12 weeks. So it's not really necessarily geared just to pregnant women, as I was mentioning, and it's unpaid. So that
And
means that
and it's just
you,
for employers that have that have at least
right,
50 employees. So if you work for a small
yes.
business, you don't have that protection.
You don't. And if you're working, I believe if you're part time, you don't
Yeah.
get it. You also have to have been working at the place for at least a year. So there's a number of ways in which there are sort of these loopholes where all kinds of people could fall through the cracks and not have benefits. And then in the UK and in many, many other countries around the world.
So is that it? You have your job could be protected under the Family Medical Leave Act if you work for an employer that's over 50 employees, if you work the requisite number of hours in the previous year, your job will be protected if you leave for 12 weeks, but you don't get any pay. Anything else?
Well, for example, for me, I had a lot of vacation time and sick time built up.
Mm.
And so I was able to get paid for a lot of that time, but I had to use up all my vacation and sick time
And
in
those would
order
be
to do
at and that would be at the discretion of the employer.
yes.
There's
And
nothing else provided by the government. Yeah, no. Mm-mm. Okay, sorry. And now
you could
completely,
potentially do short-term disability, but that I don't recall that being something that I
yeah,
had been aware of at the time.
I don't think that is, again, I don't think it's something that is like FMLA is protection created and provided by the government. I think short-term disability is if you on your own have a private insurance policy that covers short-term disability, it may include pregnancy, which is weird that you would think that pregnancy and having a baby as a disability, but
Mhm.
that again is it's nothing, it's not a benefit provided by the government. It's something that people can choose on their own to pay for that policy ahead of time. Um,
Another relatively interesting thing is that you in many cases, you can't really use sick leave after a certain point. So you can only start to utilize your vacation time. So I had a friend who said that she was really hoping and ended up getting a C-section because she was able to get 2 extra weeks because she had had surgery.
yeah.
So for you to wish to have some surgery to get a couple of additional weeks to be with your child is pretty shocking. I remember like we had been friends for years and we were both being interviewed on another show and I was so surprised to hear that because it is very frustrating that that would be something that
Yeah.
someone would have to want. Another story that kind of relates to this is that my husband had a friend who was calling us on her way when we were on our way to the airport and she was going to be having I think a hysterectomy and she said I should be fine because I went back to work after I had my son after 2 weeks and she had been a waitress at the time and I was blown away because was lucky enough to have a husband and a family that were supporting me throughout that healing time.
Yeah.
And so to think that you would have to go back and maybe be waiting tables almost immediately after childbirth, I found to be quite shocking. But how else is someone supposed to provide for
Yeah.
themselves and their child if they have just given birth?
That's what I was going to say about, um, another ripple effect where you can see how these policies can create a disproportionate hardship on people who earn less money. Um, those who those who less money are less likely to be able to afford a short-term disability policy that would give them pay while they're working, um, and do not have do not have the extra money to support themselves during this time. Okay,
I
so
felt
now,
like
oh,
because
sorry.
I was in kind of a position of privilege that I was able to take this time off and that I was able to examine this from sort of the policy perspective. That was another one of the reasons why I wanted to create the film, because I felt like I had this opportunity and I wanted to explore what happens to other people, because I was sort of noticing this interesting pattern.
Yeah. Um, and so what are the basic benefits in the UK?
So it's quite complicated, but you receive 9 months of statutory benefits. And then I believe you get a little bit additional based on how much you were earning, but you have a flat amount that everyone gets.
Okay.
And then the last 3 months are, at least at the time of that we were last examining it, the last 3 months were unpaid.
Okay.
But you do have the opportunity to be out for an entire year and then return to your job. So
Wow.
so that's a huge difference, particularly where you are receiving funds from the government after having a child. And it does give you a lot more flexibility. So the different mothers that I talked to all emphasized the fact that that was extremely helpful to them to be able to
Mm.
have that additional time off. People could be breastfeeding and want to be able to be there for their child, having to go to work and pumping breast milk is very difficult. I heard a lot about that from my friends here. There's all kinds of things that happen, and also just the importance of time with a parent as a baby is
Yeah.
is really kind of crucial. So, we actually dropped off our daughter when she was only 10 weeks old. And it ended up being a great experience because so many of her friends are children that she played with in the baby room. But we were lucky that I remember the person who ran the school was like, people call me the second they find out they're pregnant because they want to make sure they get a slot in this school. And so we were lucky to get her even into that place. And I felt that the teachers were very loving and caring of a baby, but just my husband talks a lot about the fact that it was really painful to drop her off at such a young age in the care of others.
Yeah. I can only imagine, especially the first time. I'm sure, like maybe, I don't know, maybe every time's just as hard, but I would think that first day would be,
Yes.
oh my gosh. Wow. So, so you're off in Wales and you're getting ready to interview people. Were all the interviews planned? Well, I know from watching the documentary that some seemed like they were planned, but some were kind of serendipitous. You met someone who knew someone or things like that. So let's just, you interviewed between 6 and 10 people in different places. And what was it you were looking for when you decided, I want to interview this person or that person?
Well, we really didn't know that we were going to find this motherhood exhibit. And I felt like I struck gold with a number of the different things that were taking place when we happened to be in the UK. So there was an exhibit about motherhood. So I knew I wanted to do that and to go and interview the person who put the exhibit together.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was really interesting.
Can you explain at that exhibit, one of the pieces of art? You showed it in the documentary. Do you want to explain that?
So one was an exhibit that was more of a historical museum where they were looking at sort of what are the trends. And the person that I interviewed talked about how she thought that the more gadgets and things that are offered to mothers that are intended to make their lives easier really didn't have that impact. So she thought that that was very interesting because she was sort of tracking the ways in which
Yeah.
motherhood changed a bit and that there were more things to make it less complicated to be a stay-at-home parent, but yet it didn't really necessarily help
Yeah.
the mother as much as she thought that it would. And
I
then the second exhibit was a modern piece of work that was basically a whole series of photographs that were about the experience of motherhood. And the curator felt that there hadn't been enough exhibits that were focused on motherhood. So we kind of were kindred spirits in the fact that she wanted to create a photography exhibit about motherhood, and that I was looking at creating this documentary about motherhood. So we got the opportunity to go before the museum opened and look at the artwork and look at the photographs, and then interview the curator.
Yeah.
And the piece that you're talking about was by a photographer named Janine Antonini. And it was definitely my favorite piece. It was a woman who is suspended above sort of this dollhouse. And it just shows how she referred to it as being bound by domesticity.
Yeah.
And that was one of my favorite things that someone said, because it's so true that, you actually are kind of bound by your home in some ways, because you need to be there to care for children. So that kind of idea that your whole sense of self shifts a bit when you become a mother. And I think that that was something that no one could possibly explain to me until I became a mother, because I thought, well, I know how to balance everything. I'm sure it'll be fine. But there's something so unique about you actually brought a life into this world, and you have some major responsibilities as a result. So your focus shifts.
I'll try to in the show notes. Maybe if it's okay with you, I will include like a photograph of that photograph,
Mm-hmm.
if that's okay. It was very powerful. I mean, it conveyed a very powerful message. Like, bound by domesticity is you're bound and connected to it, and there's strength in that, but there was also restriction in that. And it was um, the feeling that I got when I saw that was just tired. And I don't know if mothers feel that from time to time, but it was just like, I don't know. It was restricting and tired, but yet a source of strength at the same time. So I thought it was a very powerful photo.
Yes. It's a depth of being tired that sort of, even a couple of all-nighters for school aren't the same the kind of tired that you feel from motherhood. So that's a pretty good summation of it.
And so
Feeling exhausted, and then also that sense of strength.
it was, and I think that exhibit was from like it explored motherhood from 1860 to 1960. I just looked at my notes from looking at it last night. And I thought it was interesting how you said that even with all the advancements in gadgets, by going through this time period, a lot of the difficulties or the experiences faced by mothers had not changed. Um, and and one of the things was, how do we balance everything? And then I'm gonna jump ahead to another interview that you had, but at any time, just interject what you want. You were having an interview during then at that time UK's Democracy Week.
Oh, yes.
And during the course of that interview, you were talking to someone who, one, was talking about the use of words and the use of juggle. We need to
Yeah.
juggle between work and life, and that term in itself creates a hardship or an unfairness of sort on mothers. And can you pick up a little bit on that?
Yes. So what you're referring to is really great. Another example of serendipity, where we went to the People's History Museum in Manchester because they were celebrating Democracy Week. And while we were there, we learned that Lucy Powell, who was one of the ministers of parliament, and at that time her area she was considered the shadow minister for children and childcare. So I was just like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. I need to talk to her. So I spoke to her a little bit during Democracy Week, and then we made arrangements to go meet with her in London. So we got to go to Parliament and interview her, and that was a fantastic experience. And she actually had dropped off her own child downstairs in the childcare and brought just the stroller to the office. So we could see, how much she herself had been impacted by motherhood as well. So she talks about how she doesn't like the term juggle because she felt it was a bit pejorative, like you can't keep everything up at the same time. And, eventually I think a ball will fall or something like that. So she thought that we should really celebrate motherhood more and really focus on the fact that it's not a diminishment of skills, or we're not trying to accommodate, but rather there's so much that being a mother brings to an employee, a whole new level of empathy and experience. So it should be something that we admire, or that we want to find in an employee, rather than feeling like, oh, okay, we'll just find a way to accommodate this person.
Yeah. If we want to really look at the role of motherhood in society and the role of families in society, we can't place the whole burden or all the responsibilities on the mom. And like a lot of the conversations were about how um, women need to leave work they may need to leave work early to go attend to a sick child, or to go attend to pick up the child from daycare or from school, and all that burden traditionally has been placed on women in the workforce, but yet it's not just the woman's child. So expanding the conversation of how can we extend this role onto men. In some places you have not there are active fathers who want this role on them. So how do we have the workplace adapt to have this? I'm going back to something that you said, our ideology of what is the ideal employee, and maybe that needs to be changed. How, if we wanted to change the ideal of what is an ideal worker or an ideal employee, in a way that fits into one that celebrates motherhood, celebrates fatherhood, how could we change that definition or
So
that?
this is an area where I actually do think we have made a number of strides, even in the decade that I have been a parent. I think that is, my husband's been extremely actively involved all along, but the fathers are at pickup a lot. I see a lot of fathers at pickup. Another thing that I have been really struck by is that we have a case that we cover in my Women in the Law class about Stephen Weisenfeld, and it was RBG's favorite client. And he won a case in where he was, you probably remember it, where he was given Social Security benefits that his wife Paula had earned. And they were originally denied to him, but RBG, before she ascended to the bench, was his attorney and helped him get those benefits so that he would be able to stay home and care for his child, because the assumption was that men wouldn't need those benefits. So he was sort of the first, I thought, kind of famous stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
And in the course of covering that case for over many, many years, I've been observing that more and more of the students talk about how their dad was their primary caregiver. And I thought that was an interesting sort of side note that I've seen that's been elevated throughout the number of years I've been teaching the class. People didn't necessarily talk about that when I first started teaching it, and it's something they talk about a lot more. So I think that dads are incredibly involved, and some of that could even be the idea of shared parental rights and all kinds of things that have been happening. The UK ended up sharing the 1 year that you could split it between the mother and father. Personally, I didn't love that, because I wish they could get both have that time off instead of having to share it. And they may have changed that too. But that is a place where I think we have made great strides. And I do think that could, in the long run, have a pretty big benefit. Another case that I covered many years ago, and it was in my old textbook, but there was this idea that basically Supreme Court Justice Rehnquist had, in his daughter got divorced, and he started picking up his grandchildren from school, and he changed his point of view on one of the cases, because he thought, well, gosh, how are they supposed to manage all of this? So the more that fathers and grandfathers are involved in childcare, the more that they can actually take that into account in policymaking or in deciding on cases as well, making their determinations. So I think that we do have some, I think that's a very, very positive area. I mean, we did have Build Back Better was going to include family leave. And at the beginning, it was going to be 12 weeks and it got reduced down to 4 and then got eliminated altogether.
As paid
But
leave, right?
paid leave, yes.
Yep.
So I do think we're on the horizon of paid leave taking place. And I do think that there was just sort of a shared understanding of how important that is. And maybe that does have something to do with the fact that more fathers have been involved in child rearing than was previously the case. But it's something that absolutely should be shared in every place where it's appropriate. But having the dads more involved was one of the things Anne Marie Slaughter said would she thought make a difference, and it seems like it possibly has.
I just like it's another extension of the ripple effect of you were saying. Like you have one case, one Supreme Court case that has a ripple, right? It creates a law for it creates a change for that one person, but then it paves the way for other people to start doing the same thing. And then as other people start having a more expansive experience or more evolved, then that actually furthers the policy and furthers the change of the law in the future. So I was shocked when you said Justice Rehnquist. I'm like, from
Yeah.
my understanding of of his decisions, I'm like, he would have a decision like that. But now that you show the personal uh, experience, how the personal experience affected a change in his understanding or um, analysis of a decision. Wow. There's this commercial. It's for laundry detergent, but it's based on it's in India. So the commercial that I see, it's always I've only seen it subscribed or not subscribed, translated in English at the bottom, but it shows a father sitting, I think a father visiting his adult child who's adult his adult daughter, and she comes home from work and she's bringing the kid home from work and she's getting dinner together. Then as she's getting dinner together, she dropped off her briefcase, she's getting dinner together, she's helping the father with something, the husband's watching TV, and then her husband's asking for something to drink, so she's getting to dinner together, she's getting something to drink for her husband, then her boss calls, so she's talking about some like business deal with her boss as she's talking on the phone, and then as she's going into the laundry, and the dad's just sitting here looking at all of this. It's like, how is my daughter doing all this? And it starts with him writing a letter. The overlay of the whole video is him writing a letter to his daughter based on his observation of all this. And then when he goes home that night to his wife, for the very first time, he helps his wife do the laundry. And then it's hashtag share the load. And it
Oh,
is, I just love that commercial in different, and I think we are sharing the load more between people in different places. So. Anyways, I digress with that. Okay, I want to be mindful of our time, so I want to do a couple of things. One, what um, you called the documentary Funnel of Dreams. Can you explain how or why you chose that name for this documentary?
yes. So we were in a filmmaking class that my husband and I took together at Ringling College of Art and Design, which is here in Sarasota. And we were sort of trying to explain our concept. And it was before we left. We just wanted to make sure we knew how to do what we needed to do for the documentary. And we were talking to our professor, and we were sort of saying, so many of your dreams start to close in a bit when you become a parent because you don't have as many options, it feels. So we wanted to explore that idea of that funnel and how your dreams can, in some ways, be reduced. But then there's also the dream of becoming a parent. So we just wanted to play with that idea and think about, if we do have more opportunities and more paid time off and more flexibility, to what extent is parenting going to be this sort of more joyful experience where all your dreams can kind of come true, where you can be a
Yeah.
parent and still pursue your career and anything else that you want to do, travel or whatever else may be the case, and that you don't have to sort of think that some part of your life shuts off when you take on another responsibility. And I do think that the progress that we've made in society is really helping us on that way and on that journey to lead more fulfilling lives where you can incorporate parenting into all aspects of your life. So there was one image that was sort of early on during the time that we were putting the film together of an Italian member of parliament who was bringing her daughter for all the votes. And there were pictures of them in all the different stages, both like raising their hand and voting. And I just love that because it was that this child was getting to be a part of the democratic process, and also how much of a fantastic modeling that was, that there could be a way for you to incorporate the experience of parenting even into the kind of work that you do.
Yeah. It's just another ripple, right?
Yeah.
um, so as you, or let me pause this before we go on. Is there anything else about this movie or any interview that you want to address? Or is there a place where people can go and if they want to see the movie or if they want to learn more about it, what should they do?
Well, we have a website where I would want to put the interview as well, for Funnel of Dreams. And maybe we can put that up connected to the interview. And at this point, we are trying to do some more screenings. Because of COVID, it was almost 2 years ago to this day, we had our first in-person screening at the Through Women's Eyes Film Festival in Sarasota, Florida, which was part of the UN Women's Project, and it was part of the International Day of Women, and it was supposed to be this big celebration. It was an amazing experience to get to show the film, but COVID had already kind of reared its head, and we noticed there were, some seats empty, and people were starting to get nervous. It was sort of that last big weekend before everyone started to shut things down. So it was one of the last film festivals to occur. So we haven't had a lot of screenings since then. We've done online screenings. All the film festivals flipped to being online. So we're really hoping to do a lot more in-person live screenings. I'm hoping film festivals move in that direction to putting them back into the movie theaters, because there's nothing quite like getting to watch the film as part of a shared experience. So I am hoping to do more live screenings of the film as well. So it was part of a number of film festivals where people could watch it on their own in their home. But I love being with people as they watch the film. Yeah. So I'm hoping to be able to, maybe by the time you put this up, I could report on some more screenings.
Okay. And so people could go onto your website and the website can list where different screening opportunities are. From this experience of putting together, of having the idea of doing this and then actually doing it and interviewing it and then putting it together, what are some lessons that you learned? Not lessons you learned. I guess let me just keep it a broader question. How do you feel now that you have created and done this project?
I feel really proud that we were able to, one, spend this family time together working on a creative project like this, and that then we were able to share it with other people. And I watched it with a number of my friends whose daughters are classmates of Daphne. And it was just really amazing to get to share that experience with them, because they were part of the journey as we were becoming parents. And I think it was very moving every time I show it, particularly with people who have had a similar experience. They can relate to it, and it brings up a lot of dialogue about various different aspects of parenting. So I find it to be an amazing experience that we've been able to sort of document that time period, and also to look at a particular issue in a way that we can make the world a better place. So it kind of has a dual role of documenting a time period and also an important policy implementation that could be much, much better. While we were there, I learned about the children's right to play, which Wales was the first country to legislate for children's right to play. And I really love the fact that play was incorporated into the lives of the children in Wales. And I think, we have such short time for recess here and things like that. So, and I do notice that Daphne has really a very creative imagination because we took this class called Pajama Drama, which was all about exploring your imagination with a parent and child together. So that did some things that I thought were really important to give you that bonding time together, but also the opportunity to explore imagination. So I'm not a big fan of all these programs where you just drop your kid off and you can sit and text or something like that. And I prefer having things that you can do together. So that's what I really loved about Pajama Drama. And parents need to play and explore too. So it's a really nice, and it is kind of revisiting your childhood in some ways, being a parent. So, so that's something I was really probably even a little more into it than she even was, probably a little bit.
I just
So,
love the name Pajama Drama.
yeah, it was really fun. So that was something very special that we didn't know about when we got there and got to learn about. And so we sort of thought about ways to incorporate play more into the experience of being there.
And so I'm sorry, was it in Wales or was it Wales or Scotland that did that legislated the right to play?
It was in Wales.
It was in Wales. And when they did that, what does that mean that children had to have so much time out of every school day to play? Or what did that look
They
like?
seem to spend a lot of time focused on making sure that the play areas are really good and
Okay.
that there's structural supports for the play spaces.
Okay.
And also they like wild play where you kind of not everything is set up precisely like going to we have a lot of those sort of play spaces where everything's kind of laid out for you and they like the idea of just having a wild space to come up with your own ideas too.
Yeah.
So that's something that they really focus on there.
Like it. And there's so much literature out there I know about the importance of play, not just for children, but like you said, also for adults and how that leads to just in that creativity and the problem solving and feeling more whole as a person and mental health and emotional health. So let's all go play.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Um, all right. Last question that I end every episode with is: Would you be can you share a silver lining moment of your life with us? And
Yes.
okay.
So I think that it really combines with the experience of making the film. So that was sort of 6 months where we were kind of in this cocoon of spending time together and working on this project together. And then when COVID, which uniquely happened to be this thing that sort of cut off our opportunity to share the film. So, but then we were able to spend so much time together. So I think that COVID was very illustrative for those of us who were lucky enough to be able to stay home and um, be able to protect ourselves and have that privilege. It did kind of really demonstrate the way in which we could find a better sense of balance because we were able to spend so much more time with our daughter and there was a lot less of that sort of feeling that you needed to rush from place to place and it caused a lot of rethinking like why are we always rushing and can we find ways to entertain ourselves at home and you have this home, what is it for if you're not spending a lot of time there? So I think being able to sort of recreate that cocooning experience that we had sort of right when she was born, again during the time that we created the film, and then during the COVID time period. So to me, that was a silver lining. It was horrible to see all of the death and devastation that resulted from COVID, but I do think that that pause, that sort of global pause, gave us the opportunity to unite and really think about ways that we might want to learn from that experience. What are some things that we could carry with us into the future? The fact that people can work from home and be productive and still have the opportunity to maybe pick up their child from school more easily, things along those lines, spend a little more time together. And it sort of forced the world to think more about how we could achieve that greater level of flexibility.
Very nice. Yeah, I can see that. There was a helped us like reset our like in that pause to really reset our priorities and what's important in our lives and for the world. Um, Actually, I lied. I had one more question for you.
Oh, okay.
What is your dream for Funnel of Dreams and your dream for motherhood and parenting?
I feel that, especially in my case, where it took some time to be able to become pregnant, and I waited actually for quite a while to embark on the motherhood journey. But for anyone who becomes a parent, to really have that time to sink deeply into parenting and to be able to really nurture their child in a sort of full holistic way, and not to feel that constant push that you need to get out and be productive and be back in society very, very quickly, and sort of feel that sense of rush. So that's why I think the comparison with COVID and that pause was really important, because this is a time to really nurture and enjoy and really kind of, as Leia said in the film, get to grips with becoming a parent,
Yeah.
and not feel like you have to be worried, is your job still going to be there, or how are you going to do on the career track, and just be able to be excited and spend only that time feeling that joy of parenting, and not that stress of productivity in the workplace, where you feel nervous that something won't be there for you, or that you're going to have to get off of your career track when you make that decision.
Yeah. To maybe undo or loosen up some of the bounds on domesticity so you can experience the strengths and the foundation of it, but not be so restricted and so in all the hurrying and all the rush of it. I don't know if that quite worked. I just wanted to tie in that photograph again.
I think it did. I liked it.
Okay, we'll see. Well, thank you so much for being part of Silver Lining Moments, where we expand love and light one person at a time, one story at a time, one silver lining moment at a time.